this lecture, you are going to learn about Spanish America in the 18th century and the Bourbon Reforms. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and from there, Europeans began to conquer the Americas. Then, in 1592, Hernán Cortés landed ashore at present-day Veracruz and marked the beginning of 300 years of Spanish domination over the region. The French, Dutch, English, and Portuguese soon followed. But the long rule in the Americas by these European powers will begin to dwindle as a series of independence movements began to gain speed in the 18th century. After 3 centuries of colonial rule, independence came rather suddenly to most of Spanish and Portuguese America. Between 1808 and 1826, all of Latin America, except the Spanish colonies of Cuba and Puerto Rico, slipped out of the hands of the Iberian powers, who had ruled the region since the conquest. The timing of the dramatic change were the result of a combination of long-building tensions in colonial rule and a series of external events. Spanish America also experienced a population boom. New Spain's population doubled over the course of the 18th century, reaching 6 million inhabitants. In the same period, a new dynasty transformed colonial government and provoked widespread resistance to some of its modernizing efforts. The reforms imposed by the Spanish Bourbons provoked great instability in the relations between the rulers and their colonial subjects in the Americas. After the Spanish Bourbon King Philip V acceded to the throne, he and his successors, Ferdinand VI, Charles III, and Charles IV, sponsored a century-long effort to reform and renovate the Spanish Empire. The Bourbons applied the intellectual current of the French Enlightenment to their colonial administration. These policy changes, known collectively as the Bourbon Reforms, attempted to curb contraband commerce, regain control over transatlantic trade, curtail the church power, modernize state finances to fill depleted royal coffers, and establish tighter political and administrative control within the empire. To exercise control over colonial Latin American societies, the Iberian crown sorted people into fixed categories called caste. Under the caste system, Spaniards emphasized the ideas of differences between géneros and used notions of ethnicity and class to create 2 related social-racial concepts. These concepts were a person's social racial qualities, ancestry, skin color, and physical features, occupation, wealth, and public reputation and honor, which determine his or her casta identity. At the top of the caste system were Spanish-born in Spain, known as Peninsulares. Then Creoles, Spanish-born in the Americas. Then Mestizos, mixed blood offsprings of Spanish settlers and Amerindians. Then the list went on and on to include indigenous people, African slaves, free blacks, and other groups. In the 18th century, Caste paintings became very popular in Spain. The popularity of such paintings reflect both a Spanish fascination with race and a more general European interest in classification, which was characteristic of 18th century scientific thinking. In this painting, Zapotec artist Miguel Cabrera shows a Spanish man, a mestiza woman, and their child, who was labeled as castiza. The image is part of some 18 or more mixed-race couples and their children, each with a distinct designation. This other painting shows a woman of Indian ancestry and a man of African Indian descent, as well as their child, who is categorized as a loba or wolf. The woman in this image is wearing a lovely haupil, a traditional Mayan tunic or blouse, while the man is dressed in European-style waistcoat vest and lace shirt, as well as a black tri-corner hat, widely popular in Europe during the 17th and 18th centuries. During the Bourbon Reforms, discontent grew among Creoles. Many Creoles felt Bourbon policy to be an unfair attack on their wealth, political power, and social status. Another major Bourbon reform taking place mainly in the 1780s was the creation of large districts called intendancies. The word and motto were French. Each was headed by an official with extensive powers called an intendant, who was directly responsible to the crown in Spain. Almost all of the new intendants were peninsulares, exacerbating the conflict between peninsulares and criollos, who wished to retain some control of local administration. After hundreds of years of proven service to Spain, the American-born elites felt that the Bourbons were now treating them like a recently conquered nation. Ironically, the enlightened ideas that inspired the Bourbon reforms also inspired the Criollos to revolt. Similarly to British North America, in Spanish-American cities throughout the region, Creole frustrations increasingly found expression in ideas derived from the Enlightenment. Imperial prohibition proved unable to stop the flow of potentially subversive English, French, and North American works into the colonies of Latin America. Creole participants in conspiracies against Portugal and Spain at the end of the 18th and the beginning of the 19th century showed familiarity with European Enlightened thinkers such as Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. The Enlightenment clearly informed the aims of the descendant Creoles and inspired some of the later great leaders of the independence movements across Latin America. Still, these ideas were not strictly speaking causes of independence. Creoles selectively adapted rather than simply embraced the thought that had informed revolutions in North America and France. Leaders in Latin America tended to shy away from the more socially radical European doctrines. Moreover, the influence of those ideologies was sharply restricted. With a few exceptions, only small circles of educated urban elites had access to enlightened thought. At most, foreign ideas helped foster a more questioning attitude towards traditional institutions and authority. European diplomatic and military events provided the final catalyst that turned Creole discontent into full-fledged movements for Latin American independence. When the Spanish crown entered into an alliance with France in 1795, it set off a series of developments that opened up economic and political distance between the Iberian countries and their American colonies. By siding with France, Spain pitted itself against England, the dominant sea power of the period, which used its naval forces to reduce and eventually cut communications between Spain and the Americas. Unable to preserve any sort of monopoly in trade, the Spanish crown was forced to loosen the restrictions on its colonies' commerce. Spanish Americans now found themselves able to trade legally with other colonies, as well as with any neutral countries, such as the United States. Spain's wartime liberalization of colonial trade sharpened Creole's desires for greater economic self-determination. Occurrences in Europe in the early 19th century created a deep political divide between Spain and its American colonies. In 1807, the Spanish King Charles IV granted passage through Spanish territory to Napoleon's forces on the way to invade Portugal. The immediate effect of that concession was to send the Portuguese ruler, Prince Regent John, fleeing in British ships to Brazil, arriving in Rio de Janeiro with some 15,000 officials, nobles, and other members of his court. John transformed the Brazilian colony into the administrative center of his empire. When Napoleon turned on his Spanish allies in 1808, events took a disastrous turn for Spain and its dominion in the Americas. Shortly after, Charles had advocated in favor of his son Ferdinand. Napoleon had them both imprisoned. With these figures of legitimate authority in his power, the French ruler tried to shatter Spanish independence. In the process, he set off a political crisis that swept across both Spain and its possessions. The Spanish political tradition centered on the figure of the monarchy, yet, with Charles and Ferdinand removed from the scene, the hub of a political authority was missing. The era of independence was about to commence. That is all for now. Please stay tuned for the next video lecture.